They carried her down to the river every spring, and they drowned her, and they burned what was left, and they cheered. A whole village laughing on the bank, watching death go under the black water. And every single one of them knew that when the cold came back, so would she. This is Death Gods, Episode 8, The Drowned Goddess, a descent into the death lore of the pagan Slavs, the drowned country of Nav, beneath the roots of the world. The people of the deep forests, between the great slow rivers, did not picture the land of the dead as a fortress, or a fire, or a hall. They pictured it as a wet place, a low country, soft underfoot, where the water table never drops and the fog never fully lifts. They called it Nav. And to understand Nav, you have to understand the tree. They believed the whole world grew on a single vast tree. The branches held the sky and the sun and the bright gods. The trunk was the middle world where the living walked, and the roots went down into black water, down past the soil, past the buried bones, into a drowned gray country coiled in among the roots of the world, where the light never reached and the ground was always weeping. That was Nav, the land below, the country of the dead. And it had a keeper, not a screaming devil, a god, old and horned and patient. Velas, the lord of cattle and of water and of the dead all at once. Because to those people, those three things were the same kind of wealth. Herds and rivers and souls, all things you count. All things that can be driven from one place to another. Velas lived down at the wet root of the world, a great coiled shape in the dark, part serpent, part horned bull, and the dead came down to him the way cattle come down a hillside at dusk, slowly, in a long gray line, lowing softly, not understanding where they are being taken. Picture it, a flat, endless water meadow under a sky that is only roots, gray grass standing in black, still flood, and moving across it, knee-deep in the cold water. A herd, not animals, people, the dead, pale and patient, grazing on the wet grass of the underworld, herded by a horned god who never sleeps and never counts wrong. In Nav, you are not punished. You are not judged. You are simply kept, pastured. One more head in a herd that only ever grows, in a field that is always flooded, under a tree whose roots are the only sky you will ever see again. And the worst of it is how gentle it is. No fire, no teeth, just the cold water at your knees forever, and the soft sound of the herd, and the certainty that no one is ever driven back up the hill. But here is what made these people different. They did not only fear death. Once a year, they fought it. They put their hands on it, and they killed it. Her name was Marzanna, the goddess of death and of winter and of the long gray sickness that comes when the food runs low and the cold will not break. She was the season that kills, the white months when the ground is iron, the old die in the night, and the dark comes at noon. And the people believed she was real and present and could be driven out. So at the very end of winter, when they could not stand one more day of her, the whole village would make her a body. They would take straw and bind it into the shape of a woman. They would dress her in real linen, in a real girl's clothes, put a face on her, beads at her throat, a crown on her head. They made her beautiful. They made her almost a person. And then they carried her out of the village in a procession, singing not a sad song, a glad one, a song about getting rid of her. They carried her to the river, to the cold spring water, still half ice, running fast and black, and they tore her crown off, and they stripped the cloth from her, and they set her on fire, and while she was still burning, they threw her into the river. Death, drowned and burning at the same time, and the whole crowd would cheer as the current took her, turning, smoking, going under and coming up and going under again, carried away downstream, out of the village, out of the world. They had killed winter. They had killed the goddess of death with their own hands and thrown her body in the river, and now spring could come. And here is the part that should put the cold in you. They did this every single year, because she always came back. They knew she would. You did not drown Marzanna because you thought you had ended her. You drowned her because it was the only way to buy a few warm months before she walked back out of the next winter, the same as ever, untouched, to take the weak and the old and the unlucky all over again. They had found the one thing more frightening than a death you cannot fight. A death you can fight and beat and drown and burn. And that simply comes back next year, and the year after that, and every year until the end of the world, and is never once, in all of that, actually dead. You were not defeating her. You were paying her to leave, and the price came due every spring. And not everyone who went into that black water stayed quiet under it, because the Slavs believed something very specific and very frightening about how you die. It was not enough to simply die. You had to die at the right time, in the right way, and be buried in the right ground with the right words, or you did not go gently down to the wet pasture of Nav. You stayed, halfway, caught between the living world and the country under the roots. And the worst of these in-between dead were the ones who died in the water, or died young, or died unwed and unmourned. The girls who drowned, the brides who never married, the children born and lost before a name. They became the Rusalki. You have to forget anything pretty you have heard about them. To the people who actually feared them, a Rusalka was a drowned woman who had not finished being alive and was furious about it. In the warm weeks of early summer, Rusalka week, when the rye was green and high. They came up out of the rivers and the still meres and the floodwater in the willows, pale women with skin the color of a drowned thing and long wet hair that never dried, and eyes with no warmth left in them at all. They sat in the willow branches over the water. They walked in the green rye at the edge of the village at dusk, and they sang, and they laughed, and they called, in a girl's voice, a sweet voice, a voice you might know, to the living to come down to the water and dance with them and play with them and join them. And if you went, they took you. They would wind their wet arms around you and tickle you. That is the detail the old people insisted on, that they tickle you helplessly, laughing, while they pull you off the bank. And they would draw you down under the black surface, into the reeds, into the cold, and hold you there in their cold arms until you stopped. And then you were theirs. One more pale shape in the willow water. One more drowned thing that did not finish dying, waiting at the edge of the village for the next warm night and the next living hand to take. They were not monsters from somewhere else. That was the horror of it. They were the neighbor girl who drowned last spring, the bride whose wedding never came, the dead you did not bury deep enough, or mourn long enough, or love enough. Come back up out of the water with cold hands and a sweet voice to make sure you join them in the wet country under the roots. That is what the people of the rivers and the deep forests understood about death. That it is not a place at the end of a road. It is a season and a water and a debt. A wet country under the roots of the world where the dead are pastured like a herd and never driven home. A goddess of death you can catch and drown and burn with your own hands every spring, and who is never, not once, actually dead. And a black water full of the ones who did not die cleanly, waiting in the reeds with a familiar voice for the warm nights when the water belongs to them. You do not beat death here. You only get it to leave until the cold comes back, so you keep the fire lit. You bury your dead deep, and you mourn them long. And when they carry the straw woman down to the river in the spring, you sing as loud as anyone. Because the one thing you must never let her see is that you know she will be back. But far to the south and east, past the mountains, beyond the rivers, there was a people older still who told of the very first man who ever died. Before him, no one had. He walked out alone down a road that had never been walked, looking for the way through, and he found it. And because he was the first to find it, he could never come back, and he became its king. They said he sits now at the end of that road in the land of the dead, with a noose to draw the soul out of the body, and two great hounds with 4 eyes each that watch the way down, and a book in which everything you have ever done is already written, waiting to be read back to you. Death Gods, Episode 9, The First to Die. Don't look back at the road.